Welcome to your very first programming video for the class. From here on out, we're going to be spending our time writing code and building Node applications in Visual Studio Code. Now, in this video in particular, to kick off the course, we're going to talk about one of the most fundamental features of Node. This is the module system, and this is what's going to allow us to take advantage of all of the cool and interesting things that Node provides. So as an example, over here in the docs, there are all sorts of modules listed. Now, some, as we saw with console, are available globally, which means we don't have to do anything special to use them. Right here, as an example, we just accessed console.log to use it. Others require us to actually load them in before they can be used in our scripts. That's exactly what we're going to explore, and the module we're going to use to explore this is the file system module listed down below. This is the module that's going to allow us to access the operating system's file system. We'll be able to read and write, append files, and figure out if a given file or directory exists. All sorts of interesting utilities related to the file system. The table of contents here contains all of the interesting ways we can use this module inside of our Node applications, and if we start to scroll down, we can see there are quite literally hundreds of different ways. Now, at some point, we're going to get to a part in the table of contents where everything starts with fs dot, followed by some method name. Here, as an example, I have fs.access. All these methods are listed in alphabetical order, and we're going to scroll down to the method we'll be using, which is fs.writeFile. This is the method that's going to allow us to write some data to a file on our file system from the Node.js application. Now, we have two versions of this. I have fs.writeFile and fs.writeFileSync. The first one is an asynchronous version, the second one is a synchronous version, and for the moment, we're going to stick with the synchronous version. Don't worry though, we will be exploring asynchronous Node.js in detail in just a couple of sections. For now though, the goal is to learn about this module system. So fs.writeFileSync takes in two arguments, the name of the file you want to write to, and the data you want to write. So let's go ahead and use it. I'm going to head over to the Visual Studio Code editor, and I will take a moment to delete hello.js, as this is not going to make it into any of our applications. Let's go ahead and trash it. And we'll make a brand new folder for our first project, which is going to be a little Notes app. So I'll call the folder Notes app, and in there, we're going to make a single JS file. Right here, app.js. Now down below, inside of the terminal, I am going to switch directories from Node course to Notes app by using cd space, then the folder name, notes-app. Now we're actually running commands from that directory, and that's great because we're going to run Node in just a few seconds. Let's go ahead and actually use fs.writeFileSync. Exactly like we saw in the docs, it is fs, which is an object, dot, the method name is write, file sync. It is indeed a function, so I am going to call it as such, setting up my parentheses, and as I mentioned, this takes two arguments. In this case, both are strings. The first is the name of the file, the second is the data to write. Let's go ahead and pick a name for our file, and I'm going to call this something like notes.txt. So for the moment, we're going to stick with a simple text file, though later on we'll learn how to work with files of other types. Now, the second argument is going to be the contents to put in that file. So right here, as a string, let's go ahead and write out a little message. This file was created by Node.js. Perfect. So now we actually have a call to write file sync, and we can go ahead and run this script. The problem is that it's not going to work. Down below, let's prove that. I'm going to use Node to run a script. After a space, the script name is app.js, which is indeed in the directory we're running commands from, the Notes app directory. If I go ahead and hit enter, we are not going to see any sort of output that suggests that things went well. Right here, we have a very long error message. It contains information about exactly where the error occurred and what exactly is going wrong. Now later in the course, when we explore debugging, we'll really break down errors like this. For the moment, the only important piece is this little message right here. fs is not defined. So the problem is that we're using fs. Fs, though, needs to be loaded in and defined. The file system module, as I mentioned, has to be required by you in the script you're using it in. So right here, we're going to add a second line. Before we use the file system module, we're going to go ahead and load it in, and this is done using the require function that Node provides. And this is at the very core of the module system. The require function is how we load in other things, whether it's a core Node module, another file we created, or an NPM module we've chosen to install and use in our projects. To load in the file system module, we have to call the require function, which is indeed how we load in modules, and we pass to it a single string. Now, when we're looking to load in a core Node module, we just provide the name of the module. And for the file system, it is fs. Now, the require function returns all of the stuff from that module, and we have to store that on a variable. Right now, fs still doesn't exist. So right here, we're going to create a constant called fs, and its value is going to come from the return value of calling require. So let's break this down. We're calling require, which is going to load in the fs module. The fs module is built right into Node, so this is going to work for any Node script. What do we do with the return value? We store it on the fs variable. Then down below, we call fs.writeFileSync to write some text to the notes.txt file. Let's go ahead and see if this works. Down below, I'm going to start by clearing the terminal output using the clear command. If you're on Windows and you're using the standard command prompt, you're going to have to use cls, which is the command for you. And now we're going to go ahead and run the app script again. So node space app.js. This time, what do we see? We see nothing. It brings us right back to the command prompt, asking us to do something else. But you'll notice that over here in the tree view for the Notes app directory, we have a brand new file right alongside of app.js. We have notes.txt, which got its name from this argument. And if I crack it open, what do we have? We have our little message. This file was created with Node.js, which is fantastic. Now let's go ahead and switch up the text we're writing and run the script again. So over here, I'm going to change the text value for that second argument. Go ahead and do the same. I'll switch it up to something like an introduction. I'll say, my name is Andrew, period. Perfect. Now we can rerun the script to write some new contents to that file. Down below, I'm going to use the up arrow key to cycle through my previous commands. Here, the previous one we ran was node running app.js. Then I'll hit enter to run the script again. Once again, nothing outputted down below, but if I open up notes.txt, we have our new text content showing up, which is great. So the write file and write file sync methods, those are responsible for writing data to a file. If the file doesn't exist, as we saw, it'll be created. If the file does exist, as we just saw, its text content will be overwritten with the new provided message. I want to take a quick moment to note that this variable, fs, it could be called anything we wanted. The only important thing is that the string we pass to require matches up with what Node calls the module. Otherwise, Node is not going to know which module you're trying to load. So as an example, I could call this something like file system, and that would be perfectly valid as long as I changed my usage down below to file system as well. Now we have a different name for the variable and the program would work, though it's common to stick with the convention. For all Node modules we load in, there's typically a variable name that everyone uses, and it makes life easier if we all stick with that variable name so we can know what exactly we're working with across projects. Now, if you're wondering how I knew to load in fs or what the common variable name is, or whether the module even needs to be loaded in at all, once again, the docs are your best friend. If we go back over to the documentation and scroll down past the table of contents, one of the first things we're going to see is what we have on line 1. Here, we can see exactly what Node calls the module. Based off of the fact that this code is here, we know it needs to be loaded in, unlike console, And then they have a common used variable name, which we can choose to use or choose to ignore, though once again, it is typically a best practice to use the name, in this case, FS. So at this point, we have loaded in our first core node module and we've used it to do something interesting. Now I want to take a moment to move on to our first challenge for the class. Whenever I write code in a video, you should be following along as well. I film all of the videos in real time so you can actually write the code I'm writing. That is a great way to learn something, but it's not the best way to make sure you can actually use that information to solve problems. So throughout the course, in almost every single video, I have a challenge where you're going to need to solve a programming problem based off of what you just learned. The goal here is to give you as much real-world experience as possible actually using Node.js on your own. By the end of the course, you'll actually have a ton of experience writing your own code and building your own apps, and you'll find it much more comfortable to go off after the class and actually use Node.js. Whether you're building your own side project, trying to get into freelancing, or trying to switch careers and become a Node.js developer. So it's important that you follow along with the lessons. For example, you should have this code in your editor. It's also equally important that you take the challenges seriously. So here's how they work. I give you a prompt. I give you a second to pause the video. You go off and solve the problem. Then you come back and I walk you through the solution. So let's go ahead and jump into our very first one. As always, I'm going to paste in a little description of what I'd like you to do. So this is a pretty standard challenge. Now, they're going to start off easy and they're going to get harder over time as we actually know more about Node and we can do more things. Right here, challenge. Your goal is to append a message to notes.txt. So I don't want to override what's here. I want to add something new on to the end. How are you going to do that? You're going to use a new method from the file system module called append file sync to append to the file. Once you've added that in, you're going to run the script, and finally, you're going to check your work, making sure that the new text you append is showing up on the end right here. Now to do that, we are going to comment out our existing fs.writeFileSync call. We're going to add just that one call in, the call to append file sync. And if we head over to the documentation, you can learn more about that. I'm going to scroll up back to all of those modules and methods we were looking at earlier. And if I go all the way up to fs dot and I go to the A's, I have append file sync right here. Now, append file sync works much the same way as write file sync. It needs the name of the file you're trying to append, and it needs the text content you want to append. So in the end of the day, we want to append to the file whose name is right here, and you can pick whatever message you want as the text to append. You could add to the introduction saying something maybe about where you live or how old you are. If the concept of a challenge seems a little foreign to you, don't worry. We're going to go through this about 100 different times throughout the course, so you'll be pretty comfortable with it by the end. And as I mentioned, things are going to start off easier as we know less about Node, and the challenges will get more complex, requiring you to write many lines of code as we progress through the class. For now, though, take some time to knock out all 3 steps down below. You can pause the video. When you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Very first challenge down. Hopefully it went well. If it didn't, that's okay too. This is really an introduction to challenges, and once again, we'll get more comfortable as we do more of them. Right here, the goal was to use fs.appendFileSync. Now this is already a module we have loaded in, so there's no need to load it in again. Right here, we can call fs.append file, and you'll notice that since we've loaded in the FS module with Visual Studio Code, at least I am getting some helpful suggestions about which methods I have access to. Right here, I will be using append file sync and calling it as such. Now, what file am I trying to append to? Well, I only have one. It is notes.txt, so that will be the value I provide for the first argument, and for the second argument, I'm going to provide the text I want to append. I'll say something like, I live in Philadelphia. Perfect. Now, since we're appending one string right on to the end of the other, I'm going to put a space at the beginning of the string so I have a space between the period up here and the letter I down below. Now we can go ahead and save app.js and run our script to test things out. I'll use the up arrow key and enter to rerun the previous command. And if I open up notes.txt, what do we have? I have my old message, my name is Andrew, and I have my new message, I live in Philadelphia, which is excellent. And there we go. You've completed your very first challenge. Once again, these are essential to getting real-world experience, solving problems, and working through your misunderstandings. So it's okay if you don't get them all right, or it takes you a lot of time to figure out what's going on. It's going to get easier to recall what we covered as we use it more and more. Now that we're starting to write code together, I wanted to remind you that the lecture resources for every lesson of the class contains a zip of the code up to that point. So if you're getting stuck and you can't quite figure it out, you can always download the zip for that lesson that contains all of the code changes made, and you can compare your code with my code. You can also head over to links.mead.io/node course to view a GitHub repository that contains every piece of code created in the class. That's where we're going to stop for this one. We've now loaded in and used our very first core Node.js module. In the next video, we're going to continue to talk about the module system and require. I am excited to get to that. So let's go ahead and jump right in.